And our conversation this morning with Robert Hardaway, the author of Saving the Electoral College, is presented and protected by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Let's say hello. Robert Hardaway, good morning.
Good morning to you, sir.
It's good to have you on the air with us here today. So here we are. We're approaching another presidential election year, and your topic is really germane to the times, isn't it? Saving the Electoral College. Do you find that people even know about the Electoral College like it used to be?
Most people don't. They don't, for example, even know that there's only one provision in the entire U.S. Constitution that cannot be amended through the normal amendment process of 2/3 of the Congress and 3/4 of the states. And that's in the last sentence of Article 5, which says that you can't abolish the Senate, the U.S. Senate, unless every state agrees. And, of course, the weight that every state is given in the Electoral College in presidential elections is based on that equal suffrage in the Senate. They get electoral votes based on those representatives in the U.S. Senate.
Take us back.
Yes, very few people know any of this.
Take us back in time, if you would, and tell us why the Founding Fathers were so determined that the Electoral College be a part of our presidential election process.
Well, the first item on their priorities was putting a nation together, because at that time the nation was splitting apart. New York and Pennsylvania were forming basically their own country with their own tariffs. The small states said, we're not going to join any union where we don't have equal representation in the legislature. And so it was basically breaking apart to the point where the advisors to King George III saying the whole colonies are breaking apart, and they'll be asking to come back into the British fold very soon here. And there was very little prospect for actually creating a united country until there was a grand compromise, because the big states had said we want representation, one person, one vote, and the small states said we want one state, one vote. And then the grand compromise that created the United States of America was that we'll do both. We'll have both. We will have a House of Representatives based purely on representation of the population, and then we'll have the Senate where every state gets an equal voice. And that was their primary concern. Without that compromise, we wouldn't have a nation today. We would probably be very much like South America with 6 or 7 different nations in North America.
I've always been fascinated by how in that particular time, in that day and age, they were able to hold this whole thing together and craft a government unlike any that has ever existed and probably ever will exist. So who were those founders who came up with this grand design for America's governance?
Well, they pretty much ironed down most of the provisions of the Constitution, and they left for the last week or so this contentious issue of representation in Congress and the Electoral College. And it was only this grand compromise. It's not clear who actually proposed this grand compromise. Some people think it was Benjamin Franklin, who said we'll do both. We'll create a Senate and a House, and we'll have each state has representation and is given weight in the presidential election based on the equal suffrage in the Senate and in the House. And that's what brought the country together. It was most of the people at the convention didn't think they were ever going to accomplish anything. They just said this is pie in the sky stuff. And so it's actually a miracle that brought this country together. And now we have an Electoral College, which keeps the country together. If you look at other countries that have adopted the Russian system, this is what this NPVIC, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, wants to adopt the Russian system. Under the Russian system, you don't have an Electoral College. You just have 4 or 5, 6, 7 parties. France has adopted that Russian system, and boy, were the voters outraged by this popular vote Russian system.
Yeah.
Because one candidate got 23%, the right winger. Few people even heard of got 21%. The major parties were mudged out by 1% each. And so then there was a so-called runoff between the top 2 vote getters, and Macron won, even though he was opposed by 65% of the electorate. And the electorate was so outraged by this Russian so-called popular vote system that they actually cast 600,000 votes, blank ballots, making the point we're outraged by this Russian system, which is what the MPVIC people want to do, abolishing the Electoral College.
Robert Hardaway is our guest. The book is Saving the Electoral College. So why, in recent years, has this become such an issue in America? Why is it under attack?
It's not just in recent years. 1960, it was the Republicans that were outraged because Kennedy won the electoral vote, but didn't win the popular vote, according to the Congressional Quarterly. So anytime this happens, and it happens once or twice a century, just like it does in England with their parliament, 1974, the Labour Party elected more members to the parliament, formed the government, even though they didn't get this hypothetical popular vote. But of course, the NPBIC, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, says, well, we'll want states who are part of this cabal of a few of 11 states representing 270 electoral votes. We'll just look at the popular votes in other states. But of course, there is no popular votes for any candidate. When you go into the voting booth, you're voting for Joe Blow. You're voting for these electors who say that if you elect me, I will go and vote for the person that you elected me to vote for. But what happens, like in the 2016 election, when one of the electors for Hillary said, I don't want to vote for Hillary? Mm-hmm. How do you count the popular votes for that elector? Well, the fact is you can't. And if you ask the NPBIC people, they'll just say, we'll just disenfranchise the 148,000 people who 1/9 of the total voted for the Hillary slate. We'll just disenfranchise them. And that's their idea of democracy.
Yeah, it's frightening. Did the Trump organization in 2016 actually come up with a strategy that would be considered by some to be unique in sort of cobbling together what they knew would be the right number of electors?
Well, that's exactly what John F. Kennedy did. He did exactly the same thing, which enabled him to win the electoral vote, even though he didn't win the popular vote. And then at that time, it was the Republicans who were outraged by that. But it was interesting that JFK in 1956, before his election, actually saved the Electoral College against the Republicans who were trying to abolish it. He pointed out that you can't change the Electoral College weight because that's guaranteed under the last sentence of Article 5, which says you can't abrogate every state's suffrage, equal suffrage in the Senate, and that's the basis of the Electoral College. It's based on how many representatives you have in the Senate and the House. And you can't take that away unless every state agrees. And I think that's pie in the sky. I just don't see the small states saying, oh, yes, we'll abolish the U.S. Senate. And that's why some demagogues, they realize that and say, well, let's abolish the U.S. Senate then, because it's not one person, one vote. Fine. We would have had 6 different countries, I think, at least 6, possibly as many as 8 in North America if the Russian system had been adopted by the framers. They had great ability to look into the future and prevent that from happening.
And here you are with a book called Saving the Electoral College. It really is a strong government concept, isn't it, that is not going to be easy to do away with, and that should be heartening to folks.
Well, it can only be. I didn't actually want that title. I've written a number of books in the past about the Electoral College, and my publisher said, well, what's changed? And I said, what's changed is the NPBIC, and they didn't understand the Electoral College either, my publishers. So they said, how about saving the Electoral College? And I tried to say, no, that's not a good title, because I don't think it needs to be saved, because I don't think that there's all 50 states are going to agree to abolish the U.S. Senate or to abolish the Electoral College, which is based on equal suffrage in the Senate. I just don't think it's going to happen. It's pie in the sky. JFK took credit for saving the Electoral College in 1956 when he pointed out the very things I'm pointing out to you today. And they dropped it. They said, yeah, I don't think we're going to get 50 states to agree to this cabal to try to undercut the Federalist foundations of our republic. I don't think it's going to happen, and I still don't.
So since your book has hit the streets and folks have had a chance to read it and react to it, what are some of the things that you're hearing?
Well, they say, yes, we didn't realize that. Back in 2007, when the NPBIC people paid a lot of lobbyists to come into Colorado and vote for this so-called national popular vote, and I said, if you give me 15 minutes, and they were 10-1 in favor of the committee, the legislative committee, they were 10-1 in favor of it. After they listened to what I've been telling you, they said, oh, my goodness. And they reversed their vote to 10-1 against. But the last time, they had 400 people or so down there. They only gave me a minute, and I said, I can't persuade you about the facts of the Constitution in 1 minute, and the arguments basically were from those, just like in 1960 when the Republicans were outraged by the Electoral College. Pretty much, this was the people came in and said there must be something wrong with the Electoral College. It didn't elect the person we wanted.
No.
That was the extent of their analysis.
This is really an educational question, isn't it?
Well, yes, and it's kind of a shame that we don't. This is such a foundation of our republic. It's a shame that the schools don't teach anything about this. Most students I know have no idea how the Electoral College worked, how it bound the country together, or how JFK, when he explained all this, they dropped the whole idea because they thought that the equal suffrage in the Senate and the Electoral College, which is based on equal suffrage in the Senate, is the basis of our federal republic, and it served us very, very well.
We're certainly going to hear. We're going to hear so much about this in our next year as this next election comes upon us, and it's going to be a topic that doesn't go away. But you help us then to understand. The book is Saving the Electoral College. Robert Hardaway is its author, and he's been kind enough to be with us here in Indiana in the morning. So, what are the resources people need to know about? Where can they find your work?
Well, I guess this book you can get on Amazon or any internet location like that. Hopefully, in most of the bookstores. Also, there's a website that I'm associated with, which is called Save Our States, to resist this going to the Russian model of just sort of obliterating state lines and not caring about the basis of the constitutional foundations of our republic.
Absolutely. Very good. John, thanks so much for being, or Robert, thank you so much for being with us here today. This has been enlightening. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I did the best I could in 10 minutes.
You did well. You did well. There's Robert Hardaway with us this morning. Again, it's Saving the Electoral College. You can get it on Amazon. Probably most bookstores will have it as well.